Welcome to session 178 of Scanner School. Today we have a great interview with Larry Van Horn, who you may recognize from his publications in Modern Times Magazine, the Spectrum Monitor, as well as others, which we'll talk about in today's podcast. All notes from today's podcast can be found on our website at scannerschool.com/session 178. Today's podcast is sponsored by our two brand new training courses. Our free SDR course, The Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Software-Defined Radio, will get you started with SDRs in an afternoon. We will show you what hardware and accessories to buy to get started with software-defined radio. Then we'll show you the step-by-step how-to install the drivers, tune your first frequency with SDR Sharp, and then have you monitoring digital at the end of this free course. Our advanced course continues with the beginner's course left off and levels up your SDR experience. In this course, you'll learn even more about software-defined radio. We will show you how you can substitute an SDR for your high-end digital scanner, how to monitor HD radio, monitor trunk systems and overhead data with Unitrunker, and even how to monitor all the talk groups on a system and never miss a beat with SDR Trunk. You can sign up for both courses at courses.scannerschool.com. Before we start this week's podcast, I'd like to take a moment to thank our Patreon supporters. Patreon is a month-to-month sponsorship platform. We have 3 different support tiers, each with different benefits. But the most valuable tier is our $5 a month tier. This equates to sponsoring the podcast for about $1 per episode. Now, not only do our $5 Patreon supporters receive the podcast early, but they also receive a commercial-free version of the podcast delivered directly to their podcast player. Some may say that the included Squelchy sticker pack that is mailed to your home is the best benefit of the $5 level, but I think it's the community or the club that is growing at this level. You see, we meet once a month on Zoom and we have a roundtable discussion about scanning, ask questions, offer advice. Some of the members are answering other people's questions, and we just talk with our fellow Scanner School classmates. This is an exclusive group for our $5 Patreon members. Now, again, if all this wasn't enough at that level, you'll also receive discounts to upcoming Scanner School courses and offerings. Now, you can help support Scanner School by going to www.scannerschool.com/Patreon or www.scannerschool.com/support. Now, I'd like to thank all of our Patreon supporters at all levels, and they are Brian King, Buzz Gold, Chris Paris, Craig Harper, Dan, Dave Pasco, David C., Danny Crotty, Ed Walsh, Eddie K., Edward Bramblett, Evan Barak, Guy Lee, Jack Haycock, James Broxton, James Felling, James Peruta, Jeff Block, Jeff Chapman, Jenny Taylor, Jim B., Jim Heinrich, John Goldenberg, Ken Newberry, Kevin Zwicky, Lenny Bauer, Les Stevenson, Lynn Smith, Mark Beebe, Mason Kramer, Michael Kroger, Paul Teal, Raymond Hill, Robert Kastler, Ronnie Bach, Sal Marandola, Signals Everywhere, Tim Mazza, Ted Glendy, Tom Barrick, and William R. Cant. Now let's start the podcast.
Welcome to The Scanner School, a podcast dedicated to the scanner radio hobby. Class is about to begin. Here is your host, Phil Lichtenberger.
Today we are joined by one of the legends in the scanner radio hobby, Larry Van Horn. If the last name sounds familiar, it's because Larry is the father of last week's guest, Lloyd Van Horn. Larry, as well as his wife Gail, have been involved in the radio hobby for decades. And if you can receive it, there is a good chance that not only has Larry listened to it, but he most likely wrote a guide on who, what, and where you can listen to it as well. Not only do Larry and Gail write and have written for magazines in the hobby, but they also have their own publishing company. So if your interests are in utility monitoring and the HF bands, shortwave broadcast, mil-air, air shows, satellites, or anything else, then chances are good that the Van Horn family has put out a publication or wrote an article on the subject. So if you can't tell already, and if you can't tell from the upcoming conversation I have with Larry Van Horn, I am a huge fan of both his wife, Gail, and his columns, and also their shared publications. And while I asked Larry on to discuss a few things about, air shows and mil-air monitoring, sometimes conversations naturally go where they want to go. And I'm happy that today's guest appearance with Larry went exactly that way. The conversation led us down a little bit of a path, and it ended up being much, much better than I ever could have expected. So today, you've got a lot to learn in a little bit of time. From monitoring all the way down at the bottom of the bands up through the gigahertz, Larry and I cover it all. Now, before we jump into today's conversation, Larry did email me after we finished up and wanted to address a few clarifications. Number one, we talked about the confidential frequency list, or the CFL, and it was published by Oliver P. Farrell and not Tom Neidl. I'm going to probably say his last name's wrong, but I apologize. So Tomcat, as he was known by his friends, published the top secret registry of U.S. government radio frequencies. And again, this is all coming from Larry as clarifications as to what we talk about in the podcast. The second thing is, Larry said that we were talking about U.S. Coast Guards up on 381.3, and he wanted to clarify that those were actually 381.7, 391.8, 383.9 megahertz. And that 381.3 is or was a U.S. Air Force ACC command post frequency. So just some clarifications, and I got to give Larry a lot of credit that he's able to remember that we talked about all that, because we covered so much on our conversation. So we also have a lot of links and resources in today's podcast. I know I say this a lot, but today we have a lot of resources and links in the podcast. We put them all together for you, so you can find them all and click on them all by going to the session notes over at scannerschool.com/session 178. So with all of that, Larry, welcome to today's podcast. Larry, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I really do appreciate having you here.
It's my pleasure, Phil.
So I have been a huge fan of yours for many, many years. I'm going to explain why really quickly before I let you talk about what it is that you do. But we have, I'm probably going to spill the beans here anyway, but we have an air show that comes into town every year except for last year, right? It's the Jones Beach Air Show, which happens every Memorial Day. And for more years than I can count, I've been streaming the audio, right? The frequencies that are being used by all the event participants, and none of that would ever happen if it wasn't for your guide and everything that you put out and all the hard work that you do as well. So I've had Monitoring Times magazines and your publications and printouts with your name all over it, with things circled and highlighted and with notes taken and all this other stuff and check boxes next to things I hear. And so to be able to have you on the podcast is definitely an honor, and I'm glad that you are taking the time to sit down tonight and have this conversation with us.
Well, and thank you very much, Bill. It's been a long time coming. I mean, you mentioned the air show guide. That actually started in my early days at Grove when I first got up after I retired from the Navy. We went to Grove. Grove needed a hobbyist in the office, and made a decision after a Grove convention down in Atlanta that they wanted to hire me. I'd been on the writing staff since 1982 when Monitoring Times first started. It was back in tabloid. After I got settled in the office and started looking at things, I was wearing like three hats. I mean, I was working the technical support line, I was the assistant editor for Monitoring Times, and I was still a columnist. I still had columns to write every month. The only difference was I got a weekly paycheck instead of once a month from Bob and Judy. So I had probably been there about a year and a half, and I kept noticing that the frequency list for the air shows just seemed out of sync to me. So we made a conscious effort over a year-long period working with people that I could trust in the field to monitor these air shows and start getting a list put together. And I mean, literally from that point on, we published that air show list every year. We've not missed a year. I mean, whether it's either in Monitoring Times or Spectrum Monitor, which we write for now, or we've actually gone out and published ebooks up at Amazon to cover the air show. So it's always based on real-time monitoring, stuff that people are actually hearing, including myself when I get a chance to go to the shows. And that's sort of the genesis of the list that you were just talking about. It's been around for a long time.
Yep, it certainly has. And again, the information in there is spot on. I mean, it's amazing all the technical notes you have in there, and even the reports were not used since or new for last year, and stuff like that. You get in there, and I know I submitted something to you. I always give an example of how I used Close Call to find the helicopters for the Marine demo when they came into
I
town.
remember
Same
that
thing.
submission.
You do. Excellent. And I was very happy that, to see the next year that there it was in print, the submission that I gave to you. And it was pretty cool to see in there. And I guess that was many years ago as well. But it's great that you had something that was community based before, right, the internet, and before things were community based, right? A lot of the information on internet websites are done that way, but you were doing it long before that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, back in 1983, 1984, we're here in western North Carolina in the southern part of the Appalachian Mountain chain. It's called the Blue Ridge Mountains. Very southwest tip of North Carolina, where we have two seasons, 4th of July and winter. So consequently, we don't get a lot of traffic through here, but a lot of people know where Brasstown is at. And consequently, anything that we would do, we'd literally have to travel. We're 2 hours from anywhere. So we would have to travel, whether it was an air show in Atlanta or whatever. But that insult to injury, technology up here was nothing. I mean, Grove itself, as a company, were the first ones to bring the internet to western North Carolina. It was a dial-in service. In fact, we didn't get cell service until the 1996 Olympics down in Atlanta.
Wow.
So consequently, anything that we were doing, I mean, we had Bob's son, Bill Grove, was the one that used to go out on the internet and get the email for everybody. We had one email account for everybody. And he would go in and act as the postman. And, okay, here, Larry, here's your email. And then Rachel, here's yours, this kind of thing. So we were pretty primitive back then. But even then, we were still maintaining contacts with friends that I had been corresponding with for several years as a columnist for Monitoring Times, and people that I knew that I could trust to get the right frequencies to me. And I do remember the helicopter. It was a Marine helicopter squadron, if I remember right, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember that listing. So it's expanded a lot since then. Of course, the UHF military aircraft band has it's undergone a major change in 2004. And the band in 2004, or what it is today, looks nothing like it did back in the early to middle 90s. So back then, you either did things with a Grove CRV-1 stacked converter to your scanner, or you did things along the line of a military surplus type equipment. There wasn't really anything. Manufacturers, we always used to talk with Uniden and some of the other companies. Don't y'all realize that there's a lot of people who want to listen to military aircraft, And I think when they saw the success of Bob's CBR-1, that pretty much convinced them to put it in, and we started seeing scanners coming out there with the
I didn't even realize that. But now that you bring it up, that's a very valid point. Like, scanners wouldn't cover that band. No.
We had a lot of people that were buying a lot of used. In fact, I still have my used 225 to 400 tube UHF radio military surplus sitting up in the shack right now. So
wow,
it was just a memory of a day gone past for sure.
Right. I mean, a lot of that's a memory of a day gone past to start going down that path, right? I mean, it's amazing to think about that, because today we're spoiled, I guess, right? Most of the radios that are out there cover the band.
Oh,
so,
sure.
But not to have a so that's what you're referring to back with the 2004 band plan change, or was that something that the
in 2004 DoD made a sweeping change to the UHF military aircraft band. And one of the reasons why they had to do this was because basically they were tired of playing games with the other federal agencies to get frequencies for their trunking radio system in the regular federal frequencies. So in effect, what they did is they gave the top 20 megahertz from 380 to 400, just shy of 400, and they carved out that space so they could put their own trunking systems in without having to go through a lot of red tape and anything else. And they set up a nationwide plan. Well, that meant moving a lot of services. One of the ones that immediately come to mind was 381.3. The Coast Guard ended up moving out of that band. So, there was a lot of things that got shoveled around, and they wanted to reorganize it anyway. Some of the things they couldn't move, obviously, were military satellite frequencies in that UHF range. So it's always been an interesting band for me. I've always been fascinated with it, and I've spent a lot of time monitoring it and cataloging what can be found up there. So if you start seeing some old lists around with frequencies and you go, that doesn't make any sense, I'm not hearing that today, it could be because the frequency list that you're looking at could be old from that era prior to 2004 when they made the change.
Right. And again, there's no centralized list anywhere for any of this stuff. That's what makes what you do so interesting, right? Is that you can't go online and look at an FCC website for this kind of stuff because it doesn't exist.
In fact, DOD is taking it probably one step more. Used to, you could go and download their, what they call their flip publications. They're published by the NGA. National Geospatial Agency, where they would put out all these frequencies for the bases, and there was an IFR guide for the U.S. and there was a VFR guide for the U.S. and it would have a listing of the more commonly used VHF, UHF aeronautical frequencies. Well, the excuse that I heard when I called about this and that they were withdrawing it from the public domain itself was that the Australians, in some of their other publications, felt like their material for their frequencies and stuff were copyrighted, and so to avoid any conflict, and this came right directly from the head office themselves, to reduce any conflict with the Australians, we're just going to retract all of the complete set of all the supplements. So that has made life a lot more difficult to be able to work in this band. So, whatever's published, I mean, if you've been a lifelong UHF Milcom listener and, you've been listening on this frequency for a long time and you haven't heard anything in about the last 16 years, it changed.
Yeah, hopefully you're not waiting around 16 years to find out what happened either. So
yeah, well, hopefully you've retuned by then.
Exactly. And that's one of the interesting things too about that spectrum, right? And one of the things I like to say, and I like to put out there is, right, the secrets are in the searches, right? And that's where a lot of the fun is with the scanner radio hobby. And it's one of those things that I feel is a dying part of the hobby, right? People go online and not to put down any other website or talk, that's not where I'm going with this. But people, they want what they want and they get the information and that's it. They're happy, right? I got my police, I got my fire, I got my EMS, and that's all I'm worried about. But there's other stuff out there. And part of that and part of the excitement of finding that falls in the middle airband, because pretty much wherever you are in the US, there's got to be something flying overhead at some point in time that you can listen to, because obviously it's line of sight, right? And these things are flying pretty high. So there's something that you can be able to listen to. I mean, I don't have any air bases around me, but I can still tune around and pick something up. So searching is, once you find what you know is out there, you can obviously put them in a scan list. But searching for the rest of the stuff, that's where a lot of the fun comes in. So to me, that's where a lot of the excitement is. And again, making some changes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. That's absolutely true. To me, I've never been satisfied with, give me the local list and I'm done. Mm-hmm. I'm like you. There's always more to listen to. I mean, what's in this frequency spectrum from 138 to 144? Tell me what's in there. I want to listen to what's in there. Tell me what's in the frequency spectrum from 162 to 174. I want to know what's in there. There's got to be something good in there, here and there. Granted, we've seen technology sort of take over here in certain respects. If you tune through the federal frequency spectrum, let's say the 162, the 174, the 406 to 420s, you're not going to hear as much clear voice as you used to, especially if you're in some places like the DC area, somewhere up in there. I mean, first off, you're going to hear P25 because Congress mandated that the government switch over to some narrowband digital modes. P25 being the most prevalent within the federal community. Added on top of that, you will hear encryption, depending upon the agency that you're listening to. Now, sometimes they do, and sometimes they forget to flip the switch, and maybe you hear one side. Sometimes you may hear two sides. You'd be surprised sometimes at what you can hear if you just, as you said, search around. Find that search button, and it's not just a matter of searching for a day and you're done. Some of these frequencies you may not hear in a year, and all of a sudden, here it comes. We're sort of famous up here in western North Carolina for a guy by the name of Eric Rudolph, the bomber from down in Atlanta. And anybody that was around the 96 Olympics in Atlanta will remember that particular incident. Well, good old Eric was from up here. And, of course, after the bombing and they put two and two together, we were swarmed by FBI, ATF, Secret Service, you name it. If it had a three-letter designation within the government, they were probably here. And they weren't that far away from us. They were just literally over the hill from where I am right now. And all of a sudden, we knew we could see them talking on their radios, and we knew what we already had up here. Next thing you know, we got signals popping up everywhere. And back in the day, Bob had made I wish I could remember the designator on it. It was a spectrum scope. And literally, I could sit there looking on my spectrum scope, and I'm seeing, sitting in the middle of the band, I'm seeing all these signals coming up. And it was a target-rich environment, to say the least. It was a very interesting time for us to monitor up here.
Right. And to think about, you're saying two technology changes, right? That was pretty expensive piece of tool back in the day. Now you can go on Amazon for $35. You can get something that will give you just as much enjoyment when you plug in a software-defined radio,
Yeah, software is free, and you can go up and get an RTL SDR dongle and put you up a good outdoor antenna. And man, I'll tell you what. In fact, there's some fellows that use that particular dongle to scan extremely fast through that 225 to 400 spectrum, looking for military aircraft signals.
Yep, exactly. And the best thing is you can archive the entire spectrum and then go back and just select the audio you want or the frequency you want, and then go back and replay it like it's a DVR. So you don't have to worry about missing anything. But technology is certainly making things a lot easier for people to press the other button on their scanner and see what's out there. So, but going back into what you're doing as far as logging the aircraft and all that stuff too, I mean, that's challenging in itself because it's not like where it's a repeater, right? You don't have a squelch tail. You don't have long conversations, right? It's push the PTT and they're done. And it's so quick. I mean, listen to the airshow acts. Sometimes it's a count, sometimes it's just smoke on, and that's all you're going to hear. And to be able to hit those frequencies and log them and know there's something out there, it's needle in a haystack type of discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, as most of us have sat around and talked about for years, the key to being successful in all of this is twofold. Number one, it's the search. Okay, you've got to search. If you're sitting on one frequency, I've got over me, we're in the northeast or northwest side of Atlanta's airspace. In other words, all the aircraft going into Atlanta Hartsfield. Consequently, we have planes that are departing here. We have planes that are going in here to Atlanta and departing, depending on which runways they're using. And there are three layers of airspace sitting over top of me, low, medium, and high, that Atlanta Center, the big air route traffic control center in Atlanta, uses to navigate aircraft through this airspace. You want to add a little extra to it. We are just to the south of us, we have what they call a VORTAC, which is a navigation aid for VHF and UHF. And high fly, this is a high flying VORTAC, so aircraft that are very high in the air will use that VORTAC for navigation as well as low. Consequently, this is the convergent point for a lot of military training routes used by the naval aviators coming out of Pensacola. We have, because this is a mountainous area, they do a lot of training in here, Napa to Earth type flying. We had a 5 airship C-17 air show up here 2 summers ago from aircraft coming out of Washington State. The most marvelous thing. I mean, Gail and I are out here in the park in front of the upper office up here, just squealing like all get out, because we got 5 C-17s literally not more than 120, maybe 130 feet above us coming over.
Wow.
And they're in sequence. And I mean, it was fantastic. We have C-130s up here. We have F-16s, F-15s. When the Navy was still flying out of Atlanta, we had F-18s. So consequently, we're 2 hours from the nearest base, but we get a lot of activity. So if you've ever been around the house and hearing a low-level aircraft coming in low level, you could be around one of these flying routes that they do for training, and you have your aerial refueling route. So there's always a lot of activity to discover.
Yes. And I mean, it's good listening. I could be quiet. Like I said, too, be quiet for a couple hours or a couple days. Then all of a sudden you got, you have some activity on there. You know what's going on. So, and we've got the same thing where I am too, is, we've got the local airports, right? We got the local weekend hobbyist type of airport right next to us. And also where like the sports teams fly in and out of. And then we've got JFK. And then directly above that, we've got LaGuardia. So, and then right to the east, we've got MacArthur Airport. So I'm kind of like, right in all that, and again, multi-layered too. So Long Island's got it's funny challenges, and we used to have Grumman that was about 10 minutes away from here, so we'd see all those planes flying overhead every morning, as they were taking them out on their runs, and that was about they left before I really got seriously involved with scanning and everything else like that. But it's definitely, and again, like I said before, you don't have to see them to hear them, right? Because it's all line of sight. So.
No, I've sat here and listened to aircraft, depending upon, of course, altitude. Usually on the high altitude routes, I've heard aircraft 250, 300 miles away from here.
Yep.
We have an air refueling route here just to the west of us that runs the spine of the Appalachian that the Air National Guard tanker, CKC-135 tanker group out of McGee-Tyson uses. We hear them all the time, and I mean, I can listen to them from when they start down in Alabama until they finish up well up north into Kentucky and Virginia. Yeah,
it's amazing how you can hear all that far, and that's what makes part of it so interesting and so much fun to listen to. So let's talk about some of the gear that you have, because I know, because I've been a fan of yours for a while, so I've been watching you on Twitter, and I spoke with Lloyd last week. And he kind of let me in, as to what was going on. But let's talk about what it is that you are using, or what you have been using to seek out or monitor the aviation frequencies in mil-air, and then what you are now converting over to be using.
Yeah, obviously conventional scanners. One of the advantages of having worked at Grove for the years that I did and did the technical support is I also wrote the reviews for Grove. So consequently, if there was a scanner that caught my eye, it was one of those I would, and also having a wife that's in the hobby makes it a little easier to go, honey,
yes,
I'm fixing to spend $350 on this scanner. Hope you don't mind, as if I need another one up in the shack. Yeah, I've got Uniden, I've got Whistler. I still got sitting over here, and I'm looking at it, and I'm in Gail's office right now. I've got a realistic Pro 2004.
Mm-hmm.
Now that goes way back. We just got through having to say goodbye to an old BC 210.
Okay.
So I mean, that BC, in fact, it was the BC 210 and the BC 220, which the 220 was the first scanner to have civilian aviation in it. So it was one of those that I had a real soft spot for that radio for a long, long time. But that's sort of the, from the hardware perspective, I have a tendency to use 2 or 3 scanners that monitor. I have one that's filled with confirmed stuff, and then I'll have one that is searching, and then I'll have one that basically is monitoring for anything else that might slide through the area. Of course, a couple of 3 scanners for the local police and fire here, and a bevy of SDRs. That's the future, I think, in what we're looking at And the SDRs here serve many purposes simply because I don't monitor just, do not monitor just the VHF, UHF spectrum. I monitor well above 900 megahertz into the L band, looking for Inmarsat and other signals up there, marine and aircraft. And we also monitor the shortwave spectrum, which is actually, when I first came to Grove, I started out as their satellite editor, wrote 3 books on communication satellites with them, then moved over to the utility side of the house, which is basically anything on anything on HF radio other than hams or broadcast. In other words, if it's things that go bump in the night or whatever, that's considered a utility station in HF. So we have a lot of equipment for that, and that was pretty much where I made my mark in monitoring times. But I've written literally anything in the spectrum, from all the way from natural radio, which I did a series of articles several years ago, listening to spherics down in the very low frequency ranges, all the way up into the gigahertz. And equipped for all of those.
Yeah, I remember reading those utility guides, the pages and pages of loggings that were done in there as well. I mean, that's another thing that just baffled me, how you can identify those things. And I mean, you gotta start somewhere and start with the database and start realizing what you're listening to. And I mean, that kind of stuff alone's got to be just trying to figure out who's there. But again, it's an interesting term, because when I first started looking at them, like utility guides, like these are like oil tankers or rigging platforms and stuff like that, and then you realize, oh no, it's a little bit more interesting than just that. So.
Well, there was a lot of help back then. If you sort of dial back, and for those of us who lived through that era, I mean, I can remember as a young man, there was a fellow by the name of Steve Handler who wrote a guide for HF frequencies, a lot of military stuff. There was Tom Nitel wrote a lot. He did the original confidential frequency list. Bob Grove published the first ever list of federal frequencies, which included HF, VHF, UHF. He had the Grove shortwave directory. So, I mean, there was a lot of material. We had an old club back then by the name of SpeedX that did this kind of thing, and some of the older clubs also delved into it. But it's evolved, obviously, over the years. We've seen the HF spectrum change tremendously. The marine and aeronautical frequencies are nowhere near as busy what they used to, because they have Inmarsat, and Inmarsat takes care of that need. But there's still things there. We were reading an article the other day, Gail and I were sharing it, where a fellow was basically predicting the demise of shortwave broadcasting, and I'm going, really? I don't think that's ever going to happen. You may not have as many countries as you used to. You may not have a lot of the variety that you used to have from the different governments and things along that line. And then again, it could change tomorrow. I mean, literally conditions, things could change the way we look at the business. But as I said in the office one day, and I use this as an example, I want to say it was WARC 92. It might have been 96 or somewhere. The World Administrative Radio Conference. They meet every 4 years. The ITU gets together. Everybody hacks back up the space again, and whatever they want to do with the spectrum. And I remember the hams were making a push to clear out the 40-meter ham band entirely of broadcasters. They wanted everybody out. Well, they managed to get 7.1 to 7.2 clear and exclusive to ham radio. But the broadcasters were unwilling to give up 7.2 to 7.3 until it'd been, the number 6 in my head is like 40 years down the road. And I'm going, for something that's supposedly dying, why are we wanting to hold on to these frequencies? When they could have done anything they wanted to above 7.3 megahertz. So shortwave is not dead. A lot of things have moved to the modes, a lot of digital, just like we see in the scanner side of the house. I mean, technology rolls along. And sometimes that can be some of the most interesting listening that you will ever listen to, even beyond what you have in your local area.
Right. And again, shortwave it's unfiltered. It gives some countries the ability to transmit outside of their borders. and into other countries without the other countries being able to do anything about it except for jam them. So there's
always
going to be a place. Yes, yeah, but there's always going to be a place for shortwave for stuff like that. It's a fun medium. I mean, it's definitely fun. It's one of the things I like to do too, which is I was telling that the same thing to Lloyd, is I like to take, I have my ICOM R5s, R6s. I got the old stuff too. And in the summer months, just to go outside at night when it cools off a little bit and just tune around on the shortwave band with his, the receivers, and just to hear what's out there. It doesn't take much, but it's interesting when you find the schedule.
There's always neat things to hear.
Yeah.
In fact, we broke a story in the May issue of the Spectrum Monitor and also the new Global Radio Guide, which just hit the streets here late last month. We broke a story for those who might be listening can remember back in the 70s and 80s. There was a thing called the Woodpecker.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know what it is.
I've heard of it. I'm a little young for that, but I definitely know what it is. Yeah.
The Russians were using HF radio for over-the-horizon radar purposes. Okay? This thing drove hams and shortwave listeners and maritime and aeronautical and everybody completely crazy because you could never predict it. It was loud. They were aiming their radars literally over the poles at us and using it to watch for aircraft and whatnot. And
right.
The Woodpecker died a hard death when they had the Chernobyl incident. The reactor over there in Chernobyl, nuclear reactor, was feeding power to this massive complex, so to speak, so they could transmit these signals over the horizon. Well, it died a horrible death. Hams and shortwave listeners were thankful that it did. Unfortunately, we have to tell hams and shortwave listeners that the Woodpecker is back. And that's the story that led in the Spectrum Monitor in May, and also as the lead article in our new Global Radio Guide. I just happened to be listening on an SDR online, one of the Kiwi SDRs out in Pearl, and I was listening to 8828. I was trying to update the list of aeronautical weather stations out in the Pacific. And I heard this noise, and I went, "What? I've heard this before. What is this?" And then all of a sudden, after I went through the file for a minute, I went, "That sounds like a woodpecker." Gee, no way. Well, the first thing I did is I jumped every available SDR in the Kiwi system all through the Western Pacific, all the way from New Zealand, Australia, all the way up through Japan. And this thing was everywhere. Everywhere I heard that it was in Hawaii, I was hearing it on all these others. And I went, that's broadband. That's not local interference, so we can rule that one out. Well, I started investigating. Sure enough, they have brought it back. Now, they haven't shot one over the pole yet, but the head of the Air Defense Forces over in Russia says that they will have 360-degree coverage, which means eventually we'll probably start getting the interference over at us en masse.
Right.
So if you hear something that sounds like a woodpecker banging away on a tree, guess what you're hearing? You're hearing the over-the-horizon radar from the Russians.
Right. And how is that different than the buzzer, right? Because that's kind of the same but different, right?
The buzzer is still an enigma in its own right, pun intended. It is something that we really don't have an understanding. We think we know who in the Russian military, the army, is using it. Exactly what it's used for. There's a lot of conspiracy theories over it. Yeah. There was a little mini documentary I heard. I think it was up on, might have been Science Channel or one of those. And,
yes, Phantom Signals, right? I think it's the TV show you're talking about. Yep. Yes,
and Josh, I mean, several people have theorized what they think it is. It's moved over the years. It's not in the same place that it started out with. It hadn't been that long ago. I had a mystery signal that a fella heard over in Eastern Europe. I think it was 4939, somewhere along in there. And it was a beeper, just beeping away. And the closer you got to this particular location on SDRs in Russia, in fact, it was the only SDR just northwest of Moscow. And this thing was there 24/7, probably still there for all I know. We tweeted out about that on our Twitter account, so it's buried in my Twitter feed somewhere.
A lot of good information is buried in Twitter for some. It does. You put out a lot of stuff. So, but yeah, it's amazing what's out there, right?
We still have spy number stations.
A lot. Yep.
A lot.
Yep.
We still have facsimile stations sending weather faxes. I mean, you would think this technology would be gone by now, but it's not. We have some very interesting, from time to time, military signals that the Russian. It's sort of like what we were talking about the other day. Another one of our family discussions, and it's great to have two other members of my family that I can talk radio with. Most hams are like, if they go to their wives and start talking ham radio, their eyes just sort of gravitate to the heavens, and it's one of those, I don't want to hear it, honey.
Yep.
But I have two other people in this household that if I say the word kilohertz, they know exactly what I'm talking about. And have for years. And I mean, at a level that surpasses most. So it's really nice to have a radio family. And we were talking about these various things that you can listen to in these bands and still defy any kind of explanation whatsoever.
Exactly. And in fact, as we're talking right now too, right? Was it Radio Day or something like that over in Russia? So they're sending out SSTV signals that you can try and tune in and decode. I was looking online, I guess today or yesterday, people were posting online all the images they were picking up on HF. So there's still a lot going on.
Absolutely.
Did you know there are ways to help support the Scanner School podcast that doesn't take any time or any extra money on your part? If you go to scannerschool.com/support, you will find we have several ways that you can continue to do your online shopping and help support us. We have links to Amazon. If you click on our link before you go to Amazon, anything you buy from there will help support Scanner School. Now, if you're in the market for a brand new scanner, an antenna, other accessories, we have links to Scanner Master, where you can not only purchase a scanner and accessories, but you can also get your radio programmed. And by clicking on our link before you buy, you are helping to support the podcast. Now, if you're in the market for software, we have links to Butel. And if you want something new to you, we also have links to eBay. Again, just go to scannerschool.com/support before you make your purchases, and you are helping to support Scanner School at no additional cost to you. This session of Scanner School is sponsored by East Coast Pagers. Now, East Coast Pagers is one of my online companies, and we are a Unication, Apollo, and Swiss phone dealers serving the North American market. Now, if you're looking for a personal use pager or one for your department, we can get you a quote at the very best prices. So why does a company like East Coast Pagers support Scanner School? I think that every scanner radio user should at least put one pager in their collection of radios. The reason why is very simple. It frees up your scanner to just do scanning, and then you have one radio that's dedicated to your local fire activity. Now, with a pager, you can have voice storage. You can do tone outs. You can keep it silent. You can go back the next day and listen to what you've missed overnight. It's more than you can do with an out-of-the-box scanner. And with today's pagers having multiple frequencies and even having multiple channels in a scan list, like the Unication G1 can do 8 channels in a scan list. It has 64 memory channels, and out of the box, it comes with 11 minutes of stored voice and a desktop charger. The G2s to G5s, they do P25 Phase 1 and Phase 2 in simulcast environments with stored voice, paging on conventional NP25. Oh, and they're upgradable too to DMR Type 1 and Type 2. They are more rugged than today's consumer-based scanners. And with a pager like a Swiss phone S-Quad, you won't even realize you're wearing one. It'll help keep you informed as to what's going on in your neighborhood. So again, eastcoastpagers.com or contact me directly, Phil at eastcoastpagers.com. Do you have a new scanner? You're having problems understanding how it works? Maybe you're new to the entire Home Patrol database of programming and you can't figure out Sentinel. Did you get a new SDR and you're trying to figure out how to install it? Or you want to learn how to use Unitrunker, DSD+, maybe set up a PiAware, or even just make some changes and you don't understand how the system and the equipment works, the podcast might be great for you, but maybe you need a little bit more of one-on-one help with setting something up. I'm available to do just that with you with our private tutoring sessions. You can book me online by going to scannerschool.com/consulting for a 1-hour session. And it's great because we can actually share computer screens remotely, and I can guide you through step by step as if I was sitting right next to you. So again, book me for an hour at scannerschool.com/consulting for your Scanner Radio one-on-one tutoring session. National Communications Magazine is your personal library of scanner, CB, GMRS, FRS, MURS, and two-way radio articles written by the best minds in the business over the past 3 decades. Your NatCom personal online access account allows you to download the newest issues of America's Hobby Radio magazine, as well as back issues too. So visit natcommag.com to download your free sample issues and sign up today. That's natcommag.com for National Communications Magazine. So let's talk about, and so now we're all over the place. We started with, we went from top down, right? We've gone from shortwave all the way up to gigahertz with this conversation. So this is more general radio than it was with Mil Air and like that. So let's generalize this then, because I was gonna aim this question more towards, right, the Mil Air side of the house. But let's say just in general, right? I mean, we're talking HF, we're talking VHF, UHF, and whatnot. What do you use? I mean, how you must have, I mean, wire all over the yard and up in the sky and everything else. What's the shack look like? Because I mean, between not even like just you, but I mean, you've got your wife pulling in all this stuff for her publication and all the shortwave stuff too. So you've got to have, I can imagine, a pretty massive setup over there.
Well, we're on an acre and almost 2 acres, and we have 2 buildings here, and one that I'm in is our office complex, which is where the shack is at. But we can do our thing literally anywhere around the house. It's not going to be as extensive as you would think. I've always tried to keep things simple as a radio hobbyist. And wire antennas, yes, absolutely. Love wire antennas. I mean, my main ham antenna that I use for ham radio is a 80 meter G5RV. I've got 232 countries on that bad boy, and a 8-band worked all states DXCC. I'm about 12 countries shy of a ARRL DXCC Challenge award. There's 1,000 countries on the various bands. So simplicity, I find that number one, I like the challenge a lot more. So we have various wire antennas. I've got like 3 U-loops. You probably heard of the AirSpy U-loops. In fact, I've got two extra ones. One's got a high impedance amplifier. The other one's got a low impedance amplifier that I've been doing some testing for Yusuf, the gentleman who heads out AirSpy. I have a W6 LVP loop. One of the more, everybody talks about the Wellbrooks. You will pay an arm and a leg to get a Wellbrook over here from the UK. W6 LVP is just absolute wonderful loop antenna. And the crazy thing about the loop, and my conversation with Larry, who was W6 LVP, I dropped him an email one day and I said, hey, this thing is supposed to be HF, basically medium wave up to 30. I said, man, I'm getting some great FM reception on this. He goes, shh, don't tell anybody. It'll do higher frequencies. We just don't advertise it. Well, I guess I just blew the secret. So
you just spilled the beans.
The W6 LVP, you're going to spend a lot less than you would a Wellbrook, and I'll tell you what, I'll put the Wellbrook, the W6 LVP up against that Wellbrook. May get a little bit more gain out of that Wellbrook, but I sure didn't spend all that money getting it over here.
Right.
So I got that. We've got 160 meter mystery antenna. We've got Grove scantennas, as you would well expect. I have a special little Yagi antenna that I built just for the Milsats up on UHF. Various Got a 6-meter beam. I got a vertical antenna for the ADSB, the monitoring the aircraft ADSB signals, specialized antenna for that. A 270-meter, 6-meter, 220 vertical antenna. I've got a sloper over here, and we got a HAR antenna, a shortwave antenna for Gale, and that sloper. So yeah, I mean,
Okay.
we've got it's just, you're not going to see any towers here. It's not that we can't put any up. It's just that I found that I like the challenge a little bit more of being able to do something that a lot of people said, you shouldn't be doing that. I mean, I have no power here when I'm on ham radio. It's 100 watts and do a G5 RV or the 160 Mystery. And, it makes it, just to me, it just makes it more fun. Yeah, I might have to take a little bit longer to get, to work a particular country or whatever, but that's sort of the sport of this.
Exactly.
Same with listening, by the way. So.
Yes. Yep. So people have to learn how to do that too, right?
Well, that's, it's funny you should mention that, because honestly, when you sit down and you talk about people who are successful in doing this kind of thing, that's half the battle. In fact, it's more than half the battle. I would say that's 90% of the battle. People don't listen. They hear, but they don't listen. And when I mean listen, I mean you're listening to the intelligence. What are you hearing? One of the reasons, to bring this back sort of full circle again to what we talked about at the beginning, one of the reasons why I started the air show list was that there were frequencies out here, and they were on these lists. It would say 123.45 or some crazy VHF aircraft approach frequency, and they'd say this is the Blue Angel frequency, and I'm going, no, that's an approach frequency in Scranton, Pennsylvania that somebody heard the Blue Angels on.
Right.
So consequently, it was one of those, just get the garbage out, and that way we can get a cleaner list out there of what's actually going on. Where are they? What frequencies do they own? Okay. What frequencies, when you hear an aircraft flying over here, let's say doing an aerial refueling with the boys up at McGee Tyson, you hear them on a particular frequency, and then automatically you say, well, that's got to be a C-17 frequency for somebody out of Charleston. No, that's an aerial refueling frequency that's used on this particular air route. So you got to listen to what's being said after you discover the frequency and you're doing your searching. Then you got to listen. And listening, to me, is an art that we're slowly but surely losing in the hobby. Everybody talks about losing the stations. Stations are still there. A lot of stations are still there. It's just that we have lost our ability to either want to listen to them or the capability to listen to them.
Right. And to go back to what you were just saying too on that is one of the frequencies out here that's used for the air show is the boss frequency, right? The air show boss. But they only use that during the air show. I think it's 125.85 or something like that. But as soon as the air show is done, it goes back to Republic Airport and it's used for ground. So I never submitted it to you because it's not an actual air show air boss frequency. It's just used here, but that's its secondary purpose. And then the other rest of the year, it's the ground frequency. So it doesn't make sense to submit that one over. So because they'll confuse everybody else who's not in the area.
Yeah, sometimes the air bosses, depending on who's doing the show, they'll bring their own with them. I don't remember the company that was doing some of the air shows, but I was in the office and I got a email from the head of the company, and we had published their frequency in the air show guide, and he was hot. I said,
really?
I said, it was a UHF military frequency, the civilian company. He said, well, we sort of had a little agreement and this and that and the other, and we're not really. And I'm going, okay. I think I begin to understand where you're coming from. I've never taken it out. Sorry.
Right.
I think it's still there. And it's one of those things. Hey, if you're using it, it's sort of like some people will say, don't publish my frequencies, and you got a 50,000 watt transmitter sitting in the middle of the HF radio spectrum, and you think you're hiding from somebody.
Right.
That's not really going to happen. But a lot of those
Exactly.
frequencies also, the airboss frequencies, they could be GCA frequencies that people, ground controlled approach freaks. Sometimes they'll put them right up on tower. I mean, literally, they'll put them on the tower freak. And they'll say, Air Boss, you now have control of the field, and basically they're the air traffic controller until the air show is over with. So it just depends on who's doing the air show and how they do business.
Right. Yes, the hours is it's in the beach, so it's not at the airport where some of them may be as well. So that kind of changes things around a little bit. But
oh, sure,
still good listening nonetheless. So let's talk about some of the publications. Again, we've talked about bits and pieces about what you've done at the years, but what are the publications that you have out now, and where can people look at some of your work and some of the lists that you have?
Sure, absolutely. We have a website, and that our marketing manager, who's brilliant, he's listening to me right now, my son. Anyway, Lloyd put up. He designed the website himself. It's at www.teakpublishing.com. Teak Publishing is all one word. And that was the company that we started after Grove shut down in 2013. We weren't ready to totally get out of the business yet. Gail had been doing the center section frequency section of all international shortwave broadcast frequencies in English for Grove for a number of years. We decided, why throw this thing away and not do it anymore when it was so unique, because it's the only publication of its kind that basically breaks down shortwave broadcaster transmissions by time and then by station and frequency. Much more geared to people who listen to program content and not DXing, listening for new countries. So we decided to go ahead and start our own thing. At the time, we tried the drill of putting stuff on CDs and this kind of thing, and it just got real unwieldy for both of us.
It's a lot of work.
I had another part-time job. Yeah, exactly. I had another part-time job doing a public affairs stint over at a local college, so I was burning the candle at both ends. So sometime probably, I guess it was in 94, I was having a conversation with the editor of the Spectrum Monitor magazine, Ken Reitz, who had also worked for us at Monitoring Times. And he says, you ought to do this e-book publishing stuff. He says, I just got through publishing my first book in e-book at Amazon. And he says, once you publish it, then you don't have to worry. They sell it, and they market it and all this other. And I'm going,
right.
Really?
And they print it too, right?
Yes. I said, this sounds like a great deal. It has been. We just put the 16th edition of Gail's Global Radio Guide. Of course, shortwave broadcasters change frequencies twice a year. Mm-hmm. So we have to publish twice a year. We have the most literally from the time that it leaves her computer until it goes and is published at Amazon is usually within 4 to 5 days tops. So
that's amazing.
From the time that they changed schedules this year, which is March 31st, I think we published about 21 days later, which it's a 794-page book, and it's going to cost, it's going to break the bank now, $8.99.
Yeah, publishing is amazing.
Yeah. Now, I want your listeners to think about that for a second. That's a 794-page book. If I was to do that in print, with postage, paper, and printing, the 3 Ps of publishing, you're looking at a book that probably wouldn't come anywhere close to being under $50 easily. So those of you who have beat me up, beat us up because we're not publishing a print book, there's a reason why. I mean,
right.
How many people are going to go out here and pick up a book, $50+ bucks? I mean, that's right. No small change. So
no, not at all. And again, too, by the time you publish it, it's already going to be old news anyway, right? The best way to get it is digital.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why we've gone the way we've done, number one, it turns out the turnaround time is very fast. We're not keeping any stock here at all. I mean, literally, you go up and buy it. If you shop, if you have an email address, then you can read a book from us, okay? If you have any electronic device, smartphone, tablet, iPad, PC, iMac, Linux, you name it, they have a free reader. You can read the books. So, everybody's got a computer, right? And I realize there's a few old stogies that may not, but for the most part, that's sort of the way it is. Anyway, that's 16th edition. It was just released. I have an international call sign book for military and government frequency call signs. One of the things I was mentioning earlier, learn to listen. In order to know who's using a frequency, that call sign sometimes can be a big aid to you. If you hear Blue Angel 1, you know who you got.
Mm-hmm.
But if you hear Morph 894, you don't know who you have unless you've got a guide to help you along. So that was one of the reasons why we published that. We have every edition of all of the Milcom columns that I've done for MT and also Spectrum Monitor archives through the end of last year that's available online. Very inexpensive. I think it's like $3.99. So if you want to look back, we do a lot of base profiles. We do a lot of HF. We do VHF. We talk about the spectrum, who's using it, that kind of thing. It's in those archive books. Though even the ones from Monitoring Time Stays are pretty good to have because we documented a lot of the changeover from the 2004 time frame when DoD started changing their frequencies. We have an ARTCC guide. So there's a guide up there to let you figure out which center you're listening to and what frequencies they use. It's still reasonably within, it's been published several years ago, but it's still quite accurate. I was really amazed. In fact, I was thinking about working on an update over the summer, but looks like probably not this summer, maybe next. Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see where we stand with that. But that's pretty much it for right now. We're looking at some other projects, but those are the bulk. And we have, by the way, all 16 editions of Gail's Global Radio Guide up there. So if you want them for the articles, you can get them for the articles. Right. We're amazed at how many people have gone back and bought back issues of that particular book. And the stuff that we did on Korea and North Korea and South Korea and Cuba and, all the various subjects that we've covered over the time. A lot of them are still relevant.
Right. And you've also got your Airshow Guide too, right? That's also available on Amazon?
Yes, the Airshow Guide is still up there as well. Plus, the March issue of the Spectrum Monitor. Every year, since the very first one I did in Monitoring Times, every March is Airshow. I started it. It's the Airshow issue. And just like the years prior, the March issue of Spectrum Monitor has the latest one in it. Mm-hmm. $3. And you can go to spectrummonitor.com, thespectrummonitor.com, and you can get for $3 a PDF, and you've got all the Airshow frequencies there.
Right. Is that the same guide that you have on Amazon, or it's a little bit different?
Amazon's a little bit more verbose in that regard. There's a lot more material with it, background and that kind of stuff. A little bit more geared towards the international community as well. So, if you're listening somewhere in the UK, there's probably some frequencies in that Airshow Guide as well for you.
So I remember, being a kid, right? You'd wait for the Christmas catalogs to show up, right? When you're kids, you could find all the toys and everything else you wanted to ask Santa Claus for. And as I started getting more and more in this hobby, that to me, it was when, the Monitoring Times issue would show up with your stuff on the cover. So that became my Christmas catalog, right? That was what I was always excited to get every year. You know what my Christmas catalog is? What's that? Universal Radio. Good old Fred Osterman. I love Fred's Fred had a great catalog. Right. Him and also C. Crane. I love C. Crane's catalog because Bob used to have some really crazy things, and I guess he still does. Still has some crazy things in it. Right. I helped put the MT one together. So, the Grove Enterprises one together. So, there was never any surprises in there for me. It was everybody else's, just to see what they had in their catalog, I guess. Exactly. But, I was very happy. I bookmark them all now, with the, I have a folder now just for the Spectrum Monitor magazines and on my inbox. I can go back to it. But, in years past, I've also gone to Amazon and picked up your guide on the air show. Because, again, to me, it's the airport's 5-10 minutes away from me, right? So all day long, we've got them flying overhead. we hear them coming in, and you don't even hear them, right? It's just all of a sudden they're over the tree line and they're buzzing by. But we have everything comes into town, and they're flying all weekend long. So for where I am right now, Memorial Day weekend to me is it's a big deal, right? To have all these planes and to be able to listen to them all. But without your guides, I mean, I would not know where to find them. I mean, obviously I had to search them out myself, but your guide makes it extremely easy to plug a scanner in. And over the years, I've like I said before, I've taken Monitoring Time magazines and spectrum monitors and printed them out and everything else. And I've got things highlighted and circled, and I sit there, look at the Bethpage Airshow guide and find out who's coming into town. And I'd find out, okay, these are the frequencies I need to load in a scanner. And I've got tabs and tabs and tabs on my own little thing going on now, just based on what I've heard over the past couple of years and compared to your notes and everything else. And the amount of information that you have placed online through these guides. So I want to say online, but in print, right? Because I mean, Spectrum Monitor now is online, but Monitoring Times was always print. But
You'd be
it's
amazed.
amazing.
There's a company. There's a website in here. I want to call it. I think it's called American Radio History. Seems to be the thing that sticks in my head, and they have on there a accumulation of radio publications from all eras, literally going back to the birth of radio. And
Wow.
One of the things that they have is they have every MT starting in 1982 when the first one hit the street. And yes, I always loved this. We'd go to the convention and people would say, "Oh, I've been a subscriber since day one." But what did that first one look like? Well, I can tell you what it looked like because I was writing at the time for the old RCMA. You ever hear of RCMA?
RCMA, no, not RCMA.
Yeah, it was a scanner-based club out of Southern California, and I was writing the satellite column for them, and Bob was writing the federal column for them. And Bob took, since we communicated, he and Judy, when they first started out, Monitoring Times was never intended to be a magazine. It was going to be Grove's catalog of his products. And he had a list of 400 names. That's amazing to me. There were 400 people that got a copy of that very first edition of Monitoring Times for free. And how do you know what's on it? There's a picture of the shuttle patch on the very front because that was the lead article. How to monitor the space shuttle. And still to this day, the most popular article that's written. We had recently updated our NASA, monitoring NASA list in Spectrum Monitor, and very popular, very well received. So we were quite happy with that.
I remember listening to the space shuttle on, they patch them into the amateur radio repeaters over here. So you tune in to one repeater on 2 meters and it would just be the shuttle stuff that was going on all day long.
Oh, fantastic.
So those days are gone too. So
yeah, well, the Amateur Radio Club up at the Goddard Space Flight Center used to do it on HF.
Okay.
And
that might be where they patched it in from.
There's many a day I listened on HF to that stuff. So.
Right. Excellent. So we've got a bunch of your publications that are available online.
And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, up at the website, you mentioned about updating the books. One of the ways that we do this, we sort of pioneered the use of the blog. Everybody back when we first started in May of 2006, we started 3 blogs. And
I was just getting there. You read my mind.
It was all politics. Well, we sort of changed the mode with that, and we have 3 blogs. There's the Milcom Monitoring Post, the B-Town Monitoring Post, and Shortwave Central, which as Gail. Now Lloyd has since followed along. He has DX Central, where he does the AM and FM. So we basically have the spectrum sort of covered here. That's the social media side of the house. We also, all 3 of us, have Twitter feeds where if it's lay breaking or it's something new, if we just found a hot new air show frequency or something along that line, we will tweet that out. And again, the links for all of our social media is sitting up at the www.teakpublishing.com.
So, I mean, that was definitely the path I was just heading down. So Gail's website, right? Hers is basically just shortwave and utility monitoring, right? That's what's on her website.
Yeah, she toys around with a few little other things from time to time. I mean, she'll throw she's got propagation information in there. For a while, she was throwing some amateur radio stuff in there, but she's pretty much got it boiled down to the shortwave broadcast side of the house. Yeah.
Okay, and then your military monitoring post, that's basically military monitoring post. So that's pretty much self-explanatory there as well. Yep. So what does B-Town monitoring take care of?
B-Town is sort of it's our company blog. It started out for me because basically, I would find something really interesting that I wanted to throw up there, and it didn't have anything to do with the military, so I didn't want to get people mad. So we said, okay, well, here's a place where we can go up, and if it's sort of out of our wheelhouse, we can go up there and throw something up there. Whether it's satellite, I had captured an image of the slow scan TV transmission from the ISS last year. I said, hey, man, this is pretty cool. I want to throw this up there. Well, I couldn't do it at Milcom, so we did it at the B-Town monitoring post. It's sort of a shared resource between the three of us. If it's not in our wheelhouse, then we can go ahead and throw it up there on B-Town.
Right. So if it doesn't fit the specific niche for each one of those individual websites, this is kind of a catch-all for everything else that is radio related.
Else.
But yeah, that's excellent.
Anything else that the Van Horns just happen to find cool and want to throw up there.
Right. That's a good way of doing it too, because I kind of in the same boat, right? I've got my Scanner Radio website, which is just under my call sign, which is w2le.net. But there's other things I want to bring into it. So it's like, I got the weather station, I got what I'm working on, I got all these other things that I'd like to post on there, but it doesn't fit the mold. So it's like, what do you do with it? Where do you funnel it to? So it's cool that you've got that extra website to do that, and all of them are done very well. And in fact, Lloyd's got the other one too, right? Not only does he have DX Central Online, but he's got Global Tuners as well. So you've also got that part covered. So
yeah, it's really sort of an interesting enterprise. I mean, for all practical purposes, the only compensation that we ever receive on any of this is if we sell a book. I mean, that's right. To be quite frank with you, and I mean, I was laughing with Gail the other day. I said, if you had to pay me for the work I did on this book, you couldn't afford me. She goes, I'm feeding you. So it's one of those things that, for the most part, we're doing it now simply because we enjoy the hobby. We enjoy the people in it, enjoy sharing the information. Have been doing it so long, we'd probably end up breaking ourselves if we did anything else. But it's a lot of fun, and it's nice to have Lloyd sort of coming up through the ranks. I mean, he wouldn't have been able to escape any of this by any stretch of imagination because he got exposed to it at a very young age. Right. So, it's very, very gratifying to see him carry on and has become extremely well knowledgeable in his own right in his field, and he can hold his own pretty much anywhere else too. I mean, he's a good radio listener. So it's just a lot of fun to have a family that does this stuff. Exactly. Before I let you go, I'm going to share a quick story with you that Lloyd shared with me as well. So, because I relate very personally, I kind of relate with him in his situation with you guys, because he was sharing the same story with me. Was he was saying that you met Gail over the CB radio, right? And that's how the two you can. Well, yes, funny story is my parents met the exact same way. So it's interesting how the hobby brings people together. Is that you wouldn't believe it, but my parents met the same way that the two of you met. So we share that common bond with that and how radio is. And my parents passed down the radio hobby to me. My mom is licensed for amateur radio as well, and she puts up with the hobby. And I got my wife licensed as well, and my daughter loves running around with the radios in her hand. She's only 7 years old, but she understands what's going on with it. So it's interesting to see it, how it comes down through the generation. And my grandfather was into it as well. I mean, I grew up in watching the Bearcat 101 dance around in his kitchen, and listening to it when I was over at his house. So and my grandmother kept with it, and my uncle kept with it as well. So radio is a good hobby. It definitely is something the family can get involved with, as long as they're not absolutely going to roll their eyes. A family adventure for sure. That is true. So is there anything else you want to bring up today? I think that's probably about it, Phil. I mean, at some time in the future, if we, you'd like to do another one of these, I'm sure that we could probably dig out a few more dusty memories. from the
Yes,
memory bank.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yep.
With I don't know how many years now. Wow, way more than I can count. About 55 years now, and listening to radio since I got my first one, which my son gave me a Hallicrafters S120, by the way, for Christmas, and that was my first radio.
Oh wow,
and,
that's a nice one.
That was, well, it was a pretty emotional time for me. I mean, I did not see that coming, and he went out and got me. In fact, it's sitting up in the shack, so it was sort of special to bring back a lot of memories. My parents gave me my first radio in '64, and there's a ton of stories in there as well. So, but no, it's been a pleasure. We've enjoyed the time that we got to spend with you.
Excellent. So all the documents, the links, and everything else that we talked about today will end up in the show notes. So it'll all be available for somebody to come into and click and find you. And if they want to reach out to you, I guess the best way to do so is to either hit you up on Twitter, which again we'll put the link to that in the session notes. Or if you prefer, I mean, do you want them to hit one of your websites and use one of the contact forms?
You
or
can do that.
Is Twitter the best way?
We have a company address of teakpub@gmail.com. You can also I have my ham radio email address is n5fpw@frontier.com. So any of the methods there are fine to get to us, and we always look forward to getting some mail.
Excellent. Well, Larry, I want to thank you again for spending about an hour, a little bit more, with us today, and it was a great conversation. And I definitely look forward to having you back on here. And again, if there's anything you want to bring up, I mean, don't wait for me. Just send me an email and say, hey, I want to come back. So again, it's like I was saying earlier, I've been a huge fan of yours for many years, and I'm very happy that you're on here today. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, and $73.
All right, thanks again. Larry, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on this week's podcast and sharing all of the knowledge, or just a piece of the knowledge, rather, of what it is that you know about the radio hobby now. There's a whole lot more that we didn't touch on, and Larry's got some great resources out there. And again, we've got them all laid out for you at scannerschool.com/session178. This includes links to Larry's Twitter page, the Milcom monitoring post, B-Town monitoring post, as well as Gail's blog, the S3Ling blog, the S3Ling post, and their publications on Teak Publishing, and links to purchase their guides on Amazon. So, Larry, again, thank you very much for being a guest on today's podcast, and we would love to have you back and spend some more time with you. I'm sure that we can have plenty of other conversations about all of the things that you have done throughout the years with the radio hobby. Now, for everybody listening, either at home or on their commute or wherever else that you listen to this podcast on, I have a request for you. Is there somebody in the scanner radio hobby that we haven't had on the podcast yet that you would like to hear from? Is there somebody in the scanner radio hobby that we've had on before that you'd like to hear again? I am always looking for podcast guests to come on the podcast and share their story and their background and other things that they do with the scanner radio hobby. Or maybe you would like to become a guest on the podcast. I would love to have you on as well. Just go to scannerschool.com, click on the podcast link at the top of the page, and that will drop down to a link where you can become a guest on the podcast. So if you'd like to be on, that's how you do so. If you know somebody personally or have a contact and would like to do a warm introduction between me and them, or them and me, I would love for you to be able to do that for me as well. But again, the best way for you to help me out here, besides having some networking skills that you can help me get a guest on the podcast, is to share the podcast. That's exactly what we try to do here, is to teach people about the scanner radio hobby. And I can't do that without your help. So if there's somebody that you know that would love to hear today's conversation with Larry, please forward this podcast episode to them. You can share this on Facebook or on Twitter in one of your favorite groups. Email them a link to this podcast. Make sure also you are subscribed to our podcast network, right? We're on, if it's a podcast platform, we are probably there, so you can go ahead and subscribe to us there. Our email newsletter will let you know every week what's going on here at Scanner School. And of course, we're also have the podcast on YouTube. And if you are listening to us on YouTube right now, make sure you click on subscribe and leave us a comment below this podcast. Let us know what you thought about today's interview, or I should say this guest appearance with Larry. These really aren't interviews. They're conversations, right? That's what this is. It's just two people or more sharing their love for the scanner radio hobby. So with that, I'm going to say thanks again for listening. Thank you so much again, Larry, for being on the podcast. And make sure you catch us next week. So again, I'm Phil Lichtenberger, and this is Scanner School. We teach you everything to know about the scanner radio hobby. We'll catch you all again next week. 73.